Excited to welcome our next guest. Chip Gibbons is Policy Director of Defending Rights and Dissent. He has advised multiple congressional offices on reforming the Espionage Act. He's currently in London covering those Julian Assange extradition hearings as an accredited reporter for Jacobin. And he is also working on a book on the history of the FBI for Verso that I think is going to be challenging given the FBI doesn't love to give up information, he was just telling us. But we're looking forward to that one as well. Chip, great to have you. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. And I've had to sue the FBI multiple times to get documents for the book. We could publish a coffee table book of all of my legal correspondence.
We can have a companion book about what it took to write the book.
The editor made that joke. We could do a coffee table book, Chip Gibbons correspondence
I would buy it.
with the Office of Information. Well, okay.
All right.
I'll need the money after the litigation.
Chip, let me start by setting the stage here for our viewers. Let's put this up on the screen, some of the sights and sounds from the protest outside of the courtroom. These are supporters of Julian Assange who believe, as I do, that he is being persecuted and that his prosecution here in the U.S. is a direct assault on freedom of the press. You can see the crowd there, which is quite numerous. And we played earlier in the week some of the comments from his wife, Stella Assange, and also some of the comments of journalist Chris Hedges, who was there on the ground. Could you start by just setting up for people who may, like myself, find the UK legal system a little bit confusing and hard to discern how this all works out, what these hearings are all about, and if this is indeed the last chance that Julian Assange has to block extradition to the United States?
Well, I think everyone finds the UK legal system rather perplexing. I'm not convinced the British don't find it perplexing. But what happened was, in 2019, the United States put forward an extradition request to the United Kingdom. In 2021, a district judge, which they sometimes just refer to as a DJ, which is very confusing to me why this disc jockey is doing these mean things, but it's a district judge, not a DJ, like we think, denied extradition. In denying extradition, she rejected all of the political speech and press freedom grounds the defense for Assange argued for, but she found because of his mental health and because of U.S. prison conditions that extraditing him here would be oppressive. We've then had years of hearings in which that part of the decision was appealed. The UK prosecutors appeal at the UK taxpayers' expense on behalf of the U.S. government. I can't fathom that, but that's what's happening. And they got that part of the judge's decision thrown out. So with the courts having overturned the blocking of the decision on mental health grounds, the defense was then able to go and appeal the part of the decision on press freedom and political speech grounds. What's happening in the UK is you have to have a hearing about whether or not you have a right to appeal or not. So the two-day hearing, where they took 2 days of extensive arguments from both sides, all-day hearings from 10:30 to 4:30, was in fact not really an appeal, but a hearing about whether or not to have an appeal. Now, if Julian Assange loses at this level, that is his last chance to block the extradition in the UK. He could go to the European Court of Human Rights, or they could try to sneak him on a plane. There was some concern, as remote as it was, that they could have ruled from the bench yesterday and put Julian Assange on a plane before the court in Strasbourg could ever intervene. His attorneys are, of course, prepared to go to the European Court of Human Rights if he loses, but there's a big standoff between the Tory government and that court in general in the UK right now.
Got it. So, Chip, as I understand it, press freedom is not necessarily like a major goal of the UK government. This is a bipartisan thing, not necessarily, one party. So how does that stand in terms of if this hearing, the way that it goes for Julian's chances of even defeating extradition, period?
If he loses this hearing, he is done in the UK court system.
Okay.
If he wins this hearing, it goes to another UK court who will hear very technical legal arguments about the European Covenant on Human Rights and whether or not the 2003 extradition law actually incorporates the language of the extradition treaty that bars extradition on a political offense. But I don't think we should get lost in the legal weeds. On the second day of these proceedings, the British lawyers started by saying flat out, Julian Assange is not a journalist. Chelsea Manning is not a whistleblower. So while there's all these technical arguments about what is Article 7 of the European Covenant and what does this part of UK domestic law mean for extradition, this is a hearing at its core about press freedom and about whether or not the US can extradite a journalist to stand trial for journalism. And I feel very patriotic about the First Amendment. I think it's one of the things we do best in America.
Mm-hmm.
If this case comes to the US, we will be shredding the First Amendment's guarantee of press freedom. But the reason why there's thousands of people from all over the world outside this court is not because they're all concerned with how we're doing in the US, but I'm sure they wish us well, but because this case has global implications for press freedom. Julian Assange is not an American citizen. WikiLeaks is not an American publication. The US is saying it can not only apply the Espionage Act to a journalist, which would be terrible if they did it to the New York Times or a left-wing U.S. publication or anything like that domestically, but they're saying they can apply it to anyone, anywhere in the world, seize that person, bring them to this country, and disappear them into a dungeon. Right? That is what the U.S. is arguing, and that is a shocking argument. And, if the U.S. says it can do this, other countries are going to do it as well. I mean, imagine you had someone who leaked information about the Iranian or Russian governments, and Iran or Russia wanted to extradite the journalist who published the leaks. We would be beside ourselves. And you would listen to these British prosecutors say, Julian Assange isn't a journalist. WikiLeaks solicits information they're not supposed to publish. It's secret information. And it's like, okay, that's what journalism is, though. And they would read out, Chelsea Manning's not a whistleblower. She gave away X number of U.S. military documents on the Iraq War. And it's like, no, that is whistleblowing. And the highlight of the hearing for me really came when the defense was allowed, I guess they're appellants now, not defense, were allowed to give their rebuttal. And they started by saying, in 2.5 hours, my learned colleague, that's how they refer to my learned colleague. The judges are my lord and my lady. The other lawyers are my learned colleague. I'm learning a lot about British legal euphemisms. My learned colleague, in 2.5, I'll have to write a book on that. On 2.5 hours, in 2.5 hours, never once mentioned these documents were about state criminality or about war crimes. And when you punish someone for publishing documents about state crimes, war crimes, the nexus between that and a political offense is completely clear, because the UK judges kept saying, or not judges, UK lawyers kept saying, well, how can it be a political case? We've had 2 different presidential administrations. If you say it's a political case, you're besmirching the prosecutor. You're saying he's bringing it in bad faith. And we have, such good relationships with the U.S. And the lawyers they make a number of brilliant technical legal arguments, but they just came back with, when you have documents that expose state criminality and you put the person in jail, right? The political repression there is quite clear. You don't need to be a lawyer to know which way the wind blows. And in this case, to paraphrase Bob Dylan.
It's always important to remember, too, that people actually committed those crimes that were revealed. They were never held accountable. It's also important to remember that the Obama administration agreed with your assessment that this implicated press freedom. And, they hated Julian Assange as much as the next administration, but they decided under the Obama-Biden administration that they could not prosecute him and protect journalists at the New York Times, the Washington Post, and elsewhere, or publishers as well. Chip, how did you feel like these hearings went? Is the deck just hopelessly stacked against Julian because the UK is just basically going to do whatever the Biden administration wants them to do? Or do you think that he has a shot here at actually blocking this extradition?
I appreciate that I'm an American observing the UK system, so it's a little bit hard for me to tell sometimes. I would feel very confident if this was a U.S. hearing assessing it. During the first day, the judges asked a number of questions of the Assange lawyers about these claims about publishing unredacted human sources. And of course, WikiLeaks didn't do that. Somebody leaked the password and the documents ended up online, which the British prosecutors argued didn't matter. He was still responsible for it. And even if he wasn't, that was for a U.S. court, not a UK court to decide. But the judges did have a number of questions for the prosecutors that did seem sort of critical of some of the claims they were making, especially around this claim that Gordon Kromberg made that as a foreign national, the U.S. might not consider Assange having any First Amendment rights or First Amendment defenses to the Espionage Act. So we're saying we can put a publisher in jail anywhere in the world under our Espionage Act, but he can't raise press freedom arguments because those are only for Americans, which is a fascinating double standard. And when I talked to some of the people who had on the legal team and his supporters, they felt like the judges were less hostile in their questions than past judges were. So I think there's a cautious optimism, but this is the British legal system, and it is, there is a political establishment here that hates Julian as much as they do in the U.S.
I really appreciate the fact that you were on the ground. Ryan Grimm recommended it. You were one of the only people in the United States who actually, was like, hey, maybe I'll just go actually check out this very important case for our own legal system and for the world. So, Chip, we really appreciate the work that you're doing. Where can people learn more about it and support you?
Yeah, you can learn more about defending rights in dissent at rightsanddissent.org. I'm also on Twitter against my better judgment at Chip Gibbons 89. I keep waiting for Elon Musk to finally break Twitter, and then I can finally get off of it. But they keep threatening us with a good time, and we never get it.
I know. Yeah, I feel very similarly. But then there are also days when Twitter really delivers. The Taylor Swift discourse was fun.
That was
this Google image situation was entertaining. So I can't quit it. I'm not going to pretend.
Right.
Chip, thank you so much
I can't quit it, but I'd like to.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Exactly.
I'm with you, my friend.
Chip, it's great to meet you. And thank you again for joining us and for helping our audience understand what's going on there.
Thank you.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.